Are you reading or are you just counting books? Do you ever have the book in front of you and you're thinking more about the next book that you've got to read than the one that you're currently reading? And are you thinking about finishing the book rather than savouring, enjoying the book? And has the idea that you need to read more become really overwhelming to you, to the point where you are counting books rather than reading them? I'm going to invite you to stop thinking about reading more and start thinking about reading more joyfully. I'm Jack, this is Spread Book Joy, and this is probably going to be a really rambly video. I've filmed it twice already, this is the third time, because it's a mishmash of my experiences and my thoughts on reading more, and they are mixed. And how I've gone from being someone who wanted to read more and discovered BookTube because I googled how to read more, and went through this full 6-year span of just taking part in all the things and doubling the amount that I read, and then being quite unhappy and not knowing exactly why I was unhappy because I was reading more than ever but not very happy, and getting to the point that I'm at now, which is what I want to share with you, which is why I am extremely happy with my reading life now, because it's changed immeasurably since I started BookTube. I am not the reader I was before I joined BookTube. I have run the gamut of BookTube events and emotions, and I've come out the other side, and I've kind of found a way to blend the mood reader that I was before BookTube with the semi-planned reader, I suppose you could call me, that I am now. I did a video last year called Can We Read Too Much? And that caused quite a lot of debate on BookTube, and it did quite well, but a few people were like, well, I like reading a lot, and as if I was saying you shouldn't try and if you're reading a lot and that's all you do, that's a bad thing. Absolutely not. Most people were very positive about it though, and I look back on that now and I realise I didn't know exactly what the problem was, and I do now, because I had a really fraught year last year where I had a lot of things happen personally, and a number of bereavements and lots of family illness and things like that, and it brought my reading crashing down to a point where I stopped all of the things I was doing and then rebuilt my reading life into what it is today, which is the most joyful it's been in a number of years. For a number of years I was counting my books, and I was constantly thinking about what I had to read next, and furiously making lists of all the things I was seeing on BookTube that I wanted to read, because I just love books and reading so much. I want to read everything and I want to do everything, and I've just got tons of books that I've bought as well that I want to get to, and then there's that reading event over there, and then someone reviewed that book over there, then everyone's best of videos came out at New Year and they were great. So I spent years just trying to drink from the fire hose of new book releases or backlist books that people were reviewing. All the content on BookTube was just like, I want it all. And when you start, you're like a kid in a candy store, you're loving it, and it is a great community and I love it. But last year it was getting on top of me, very much so, and I couldn't extricate myself from it, and then I had to just completely stop everything because of some things that happened, and then I had to rebuild things, and I was determined not to go down the route I was at, where I was becoming overwhelmed and unhappy and anxious and miserable. I just want to share my experiences with everybody, and they may resonate with you, they may not. You might look at my experience and think, well, that was you, that's not me, and that's fine. I recognise that this is a me thing, this is my experience. I just think it might resonate with some people. It's a lot of mental changes for me, basically, and how I read more joyfully, and what reading more joyfully means, and why I think I'm advocating for that rather than telling people to read more. First of all though, I want to caveat this as well by saying I am not one of those people who is going to denigrate the aim of reading more. I've seen some videos on BookTube where people say, oh, let's get away from this, and they are saying the same thing as me about the numbers culture, get away from that. I agree with that. But then they're saying, oh, let's try not to read more because we don't aim to watch more films or eat more pizza, I think was one of the things that I saw, and I was like, that's just nonsense argument. That is a fallacy. Reading is good for you. Reading for pleasure is good for you. There is research out there, and I've read loads of it because I did an MA in education and reading was my specialism, and reading for pleasure enhances your life chances, your emotional well-being, your educational chances, your socioeconomic chances in life, and reading more is good for you. Choosing to read more in your spare time and read for pleasure is good for you. So we do say, I want to do more exercise, I want to eat more healthy food. That's what reading is. Reading more should be in those categories. What the problem is when you start to think about reading more and you're trying to drink from the fire hose of all the things that are out there, and you're getting overloaded and overwhelmed with all the things that you haven't got to yet. So that's when it starts to become toxic for me, and I think counting is part of that for me. And I also read some research, and I'll link all of these things in the description box below, that I read this bit of research because it was in a podcast where they were talking about counting steps. And there is a bit of research which is around counting and measuring things, like steps, and reading was part of this study, which wasn't mentioned in the podcast, just I happened to have a look at the research that they'd mentioned, and they talked about the fact that an outcome of the research showed that when we start to count things, it becomes like a job and therefore less enjoyable. And that resonated with me. Some people, I get it. If you like counting the amounts, if you think that's a metric you want to measure the success of your reading by, please go for it. That's fine. I'm not denigrating it for everybody, because I recognise that not everybody is me and not everybody has the same experiences. So that's fine. I'm just thinking, if you can't pinpoint something that's making you unhappy with your reading life and you're like me, it may be this. So yeah, counting books and reading more. Reading more is not inherently bad, but what we do and how we go about it, that may be a problem. When you say more, do you mean more books, more pages, more time to read, which would result in more books being read, but you're not worrying about the metrics of counting books and pages? I have got something I'm doing that's going to be totally different, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment, but you've got to really think carefully about what you mean when you say you want to read more. And it's kind of fueled a bit by the constant barrage of information that we have, especially if you're in the booktube community, and I won't even go down the consumerism side of it, but that is a thing, of course. But one of the things I want you to think about, which helped me, was this idea of the existential dread that we also have when we think about reading and all the books that we're never going to get to read. And there's an amazing David Bowie quote where he said something like, his library of books, he would look at it and he would say, look at all the books that he had left that he hadn't read, and think about how much longer he might live. And he'd think, I can't read 2/3 of these books. And he said it would just fill him or overwhelm him with sadness. And I think we've all had that. That's an existential dread kind of thing, and I had that quite a lot. And there are a few things that have helped me with this. First of all, the drink from the fire hose, and trying to read all of the books. One is accepting that you're not going to be able to read all the books. It's sad but true that we have a finite amount of time in our lives, but once you accept that, it's kind of freeing as well. And I read a great book on that, and I always recommend it, 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. And he also wrote a book called Meditations for Mortals, in which he talks about information overload. So I'm going to read you a couple of things from that because I think they're really useful. So he talks about the amount of information that's out there that we could consume, and he talks about it as a ubiquitous modern problem to have not only a teetering pile of books you've been meaning to read, but a digital stack of articles you'd like to digest, plus a long queue of podcast episodes to listen to, videos or TV shows to watch, or video games you'd purchase and love to play if only you could find the time. And that is absolutely 100% true. It's a very modern problem that we have about finding the time to do all of the things, because also we're constantly bombarded with information in our feeds, which before the internet we had to, if we wanted to know the latest books, you had to go to a bookshop, we had to read the book review pages in the newspapers. And I remember being a bookseller and people coming in on a Monday morning with snipped things out of the Sunday supplements where they'd read book reviews. That's how the people found out about books. You know, nowadays you're just bombarded with it, especially if you've got if you're following bookish things online. we're just constantly bombarded with this information. So he talks about that and about finding the time, and he says some of the things that we try to do, he says, we think about improving efficiency and thinking about trying to speed up and consume things more quickly. And that's another thing I was thinking that I was doing quite a lot of. I do watch a lot of things on double speed and listen to a lot of things on double speed, but generally I was doing that sometimes with books that I needed to get through and finish. And did I enjoy those? Did I take in those books and enjoy that experience? Not that much. There are books that I still listen to at double speed or higher speed because the narrator's a bit slow for me. But some of it I was doing because I just wanted the information. And I'm going to talk about like this idea of just getting the information out of a book, because I think when you're doing that, are you enjoying the process of reading, or do you want to have read the book? And yeah, I'll talk about that a bit in a little bit. But he talks about this idea of listening to things on double speed or learning to speed read. And that's how I found BookTube actually, was learning to speed read. And I'll tell you now, it is not an enjoyable way for me to read a book. Some people might read that way and that might be the way they read. For me, I don't enjoy that. I'm kind of, probably not taking in or experiencing it or being there with the characters. When I read a book and I'm loving a book, I want to slow that reading down, not speed it up. I want to I want to devour the book, but at a pace that means I'm there with the characters and I'm there in the scene. So he talks about speed reading and this idea that we're constantly trying to consume. So he has some advice, and the first bit of advice is to treat your to read pile or TBR pile like a river, not a bucket. And I think that's a great analogy. And he says, think of your backlog not as a container that gradually fills up and it's your job to empty, but as a stream that flows past you, from which you get to pick a few choice items here and there without feeling guilty for letting all the others float by. And then he goes on to say something that is the most poignant thing really, which is about being mindful. And this is what I mean about reading more joyfully. He says, remember that consuming information is a present moment activity like everything else. It's not merely that a fixation on retaining facts is a poor way to reap the benefits of reading, it's also that any focus on reaping the benefits risks obscuring the truth that a meaningful life in the end has to involve at least some activities we love doing for themselves here and now. So you needn't always choose to read what's most edifying or professionally useful or most enthusiastically endorsed by the arbiters of the culture, booktubers, whoever. Sometimes it's okay to just read whatever seems most fun. Spending half an hour reading something interesting, moving or inspiring or merely amusing might be worth doing, not just to improve who you become in the future or get it off your plate, but for the sake of that very half hour of being alive. And that kind of made me think of this quote that I read about writing, it's always attributed to Dorothy Parker, but it may be by someone else. I've looked it up on the internet and there's a bit of debate about who said it, but it's about writing. I hate writing, but I love having written. I feel like at points in the last 6 years where, not that I hate was a strong word, but I didn't want to read, but I wanted to have read the book and I wanted to have finished the book. And so I was sitting there thinking, gosh, that means I'm moving away from enjoying the process of reading. And if you ask yourself this question, if you're looking at a book and you think, and ask yourself this, if you could download that book to your brain and have the information that's in it without having going through the process of reading it, would you do it? And if that's the case, then maybe that's a book you just want the information from and you could turn it on at 2 times the speed or speed read it. Or if it's the book you don't really care about having read, or maybe you don't want to read it, maybe the process of reading here and enjoying that book is not going to work for you, in which case, why are you reading it? So it made me think about the benefits of mindful and slow reading, because I'm doing a lot more of that nowadays. I'm not really thinking about getting like how long it's going to take me to read X, Y, and Z book, because I know I've got this book I want to read or that book I want to read. It doesn't mean I'm not setting up piles of possibilities or things or planning my reading. I am, but if I get to it, I get to it. If I'm enjoying the current read, I'm going to read that and worry about that. I'm not going to think about the next book. Another thing is that sometimes we just need to slow read a book because it is a big book that could be intimidating if you think about having to finish it. But why don't you just read the book for that half hour of that day and just think about that half hour of reading and not think about the next thing and the next thing. Slow reading for me has brought me immense joy when I've had to read something that is quite dense, either emotionally dense or intellectually dense, whether it be non-fiction, whether it be a huge book, or whether it be a classic. Sometimes you need to slow down and read those things at a pace, maybe process parts of it for a few days, or go back to it. I reread A Suitable Boy last year. If I was still counting books, I probably would have gone, no, even though I love big books prior to BookTube. Once I started BookTube and I had lots of other books on my plate to get rid of or finish, something like this would have been like, I could probably read 4 books in the time it takes me to read this 1,500 pages, so I'll probably read some other things. But I actually read this, and I read it over 5 months, and that was fine. I didn't sit there thinking, oh gosh, that's still going, I need to finish that. I just read it and enjoyed the process, and I sat with it, and while I was reading it, I wasn't thinking about the next pages, the next days, what I had left, what I was going to read instead of it. I read it alongside other things, because one of my things is I read multiple books at a time. If you're one of those people, that's one of the things I do that brings me a lot of joy, because my mood changes not only from minute to minute, but from day to day, from hour to hour, from week to week. So my energy levels change. So I'll read something like this in the morning, and then I'll read my Charlene Harris Sookie Stackhouse book in the evening, my brain candy book. So what am I doing to read more joyfully? A number of things, like I said, I pick and mix. I listen to my mood, I listen to my energy levels. I don't avoid hard, difficult, emotional, long books, anything like that, because I'm not counting my books. So I don't think, A Suitable Boy, I could read 4 other books in that time. I'm not avoiding things at all. I just read what I feel like, when I feel like it, and I think about my mood, my energy levels, etc. I also try to be more mindful about what I'm reading. I'm not thinking about finishing this because I've got another pile of books to read. I'm just thinking about that book at that time. I do have to work at that. Don't get me wrong. This isn't something that comes naturally to me. I do have to work at it. But I'm thinking about whether I'm enjoying what I'm reading. And if I'm not enjoying it, I stop reading it. I might stop reading it because I'm not in the mood for it and go back to it. Or I might just go, this isn't the book for me, and then I'll go on and read something else. So I'm inviting you to think about trying to read more by reading more joyfully, rather than thinking, I want to read more books, and then reading 50% of books that you really enjoy. I'm going to try and think about my quality of my reading. That's what I'm aiming to do. So I'm going to invite you to try and think about the same thing. I am going to measure the success of my reading. I'm going to think about, of all the books that I read this year, what was my percentage of books that I really, really enjoyed? And I want that to be higher. Okay, that's my metric for success. Not how many books I read, not how many pages I read, because I could read 15 books in a month and enjoy 3 of them would be the panning for gold nuggets that I want to find now, or I could read 3 books and they're all amazing, right? So that's going to be my metric for success. Not how many books I've read, but how many great books I've read, and how much I've enjoyed my reading time. And if you're counting books, like I said, if you still want to count, that's fine. Maybe consider counting pages rather than counting books. In that way, you're not going to avoid big chunkers, which are well worth your time as well, and you're avoiding those and you're going to miss out on those. And then maybe think about, like I said, instead of thinking about your TBR pile as a bucket that needs to be emptied, think about it as a river that you're just going to and pick something out, or like a stream that you pluck things from as it goes past. And yeah, all of those wonderful, mindful reading things. Are you enjoying the process, or are you trying to finish it? Are you enjoying reading the book, or are you trying to finish the book? There is satisfaction in finishing books, I get that, but yeah, is it because you were glad to get it off your plate, or because you've closed that and think, wow, what an experience? There was a wonderful piece of research about Swedish book clubs in Swedish schools that I read when I was doing my MA research, and my research was around teachers as readers and how our reading identities impact developing children's reading identities. And one of the things I read about was, in Sweden they call it, and I'm not going to pronounce the Swedish word, I'll put it on the screen, which translates to the bookworm age, or it's also called the Age of Book Devouring. And I remember that age. It's a stage of reading that we want children to get into, which hooks them on reading. And it's when they've finished the hard work of learning to read, and they're not quite a reader yet because they're not choosing to do it for themselves, but then they discover the right book, and suddenly that is all they do, is they want to read and devour those books. And usually it's quite a narrow focus. For me, it was like Enid Blyton, all the Enid Blyton books I could get my hands on. But they will come out of it and start widening their scope once they've exhausted that pool of whatever it is they're interested in, books about, I don't know, ponies or Hardy Boys, detective stories, whatever it may be, once they've exhausted that to the point where their brain's going, this is good, but I need something new. That Age of Book Devouring, I remember it so clearly. And I don't know if you got into reading as a child or got into reading as an adult, there must have been something that hooked you in. Do you remember that feeling? That's the feeling I'm aiming for. When I say I want to read more joyfully, that's what I want. I want those experiences, and I want to make more of the time that I've got and find more of those books. I feel like I'm going to have read more books by the end of this year, but I'm not going to aim to read more. I'm going to aim to read more joyfully. Like I said, my metric will be the percentage of books that I've read that have been thrilling or wonderful or have stayed with me, and I'm going to be panning for gold and trying to get back to that Age of Book Devouring. Hopefully that resonated or helped some people out there. I know some people will be sitting there thinking, that's what I do, that's how I read. Brilliant, that's perfect, because I think reading should be joyful. And there are some people thinking, no, I love measuring and counting my books and counting my pages, and that is also great. I'm very happy for you if that works for you. It just affected me badly, and I know that's a me problem, and it might be a problem for some other people, and I'm hoping to help them. So yeah, let me know in the chat if how you have been enjoying your reading, if it resonated with you, if you want to see any more advice on how I read and any more videos or chats about this, be interested to know. If you want to leave a comment but don't know what to say, you can leave me an emoji about joyful reading, whatever that may mean for you, or just being joyful. And if you've never been here before, maybe think about subscribing and coming back for more of this rambling nonsense, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Bye.